Hey guys, CJ here. So, what happened to Aurora and the Mongols? At the beginning of the 2025 season, both of these teams came out the gate swinging in a sort of step up from the end of their 2024. Mongols doing about what we expected, still having their playoff sort of choking, looking at Senzu, and Eternal Fire missing Shanghai altogether due to a strong start to the season, but tapering off as it went, sort of not having that endurance, and eventually making the switch for Calyx for Jota. But now, as we get into the build up to the major, with only, Astana and Dallas really being the steps in the way, both teams have sort of been pushed to the wayside by the arrival of Falcons. And that is no surprise, as Falcons already had a solid core picked up from Heroic last year, but it goes against, expectations from what we had seen from them in the past. But they finally got Monacy, so that's rather hard to, put a supporting cast around Nico and Monacy that won't succeed in any capacity. I will remind everyone of the G Stu Dallas run last year, where they won with Hunter, Nexa, Stewie, Nico, and Monacy, with the two of them putting on a ultra carry performance of a lifetime. But either way, Falcons are a competitive top 5 team, and that is without doubt, being Vitality at the top, with, Spirit, Mouse, and Falcons now being the three sort of chasing after them. If we were to put together a perfect top 4 for the major, that's definitely what I'm looking for right now. And it's sort of edged out the Eternal Fire and the Mongols, who were building these narratives and building this momentum to hopefully pick up a tier 1 trophy and make a huge splash in history for themselves. But now they're kind of gone, and what's going on with that? Let's figure it out, why don't we? So first, taking a peek at the Mongols. Over the course of the entire season, I'm going to be using ADR today as just a metric to track, because even though KPR is a king stat, quote Thorin, and there are many other great ways to evaluate things deeply, I'm just doing some quick surface analysis while I develop other tools. Charting their ADR over time, you can see already the fact that Senzu actually is putting up rather consistently this season, but as we did get past the later part, he stopped having his notable spikes in performance. And as we, move specifically into the CT side, he stops having significant CT performances, and Blitz actually does take up the mantle and ends so far, even with their most recent match, as their highest performer with, his 3 consistent spikes right there. If we go to their T side, you can see it's somewhat overall less spiky than their CT and overall charts, meaning, they're having less individuals popping off significantly at this stage of the season. And if you look towards the middle, where there's those 3 significant pop-offs for, Senzu, Blitz, and 910, that is, against some pretty differing opposition, but that 910, or sorry, that Blitz pop off against Na'Vi, that is legit, and that's a very notable performance. But as you can see as it goes on, they don't really have too many other standouts. If we had to really get into it on a more specific level, looking at, say, Blitz, comparing his CT versus his T side ADR, he's actually having fairly consistent standout performances on the CT side, which is what we're looking for on an IGL. Also, Mizinho, someone who I'm actually very pleasantly surprised with. If you look at his sort of combined ADR charting for the past period, he had a really great string of consistency across 5 matches, ending with their loss to Vitality after beating Liquid in playoffs of Melbourne. But he has a really good string of consistency going on for him right now. And if you put his CT and T side ratings, split in the same way, you can see that they actually fall rather close together during that time period as well. But having some rather strong CT showings as well overall in that period is what is really pushing them forward to that success. Moving on to Senzu. Senzu was in one hell of a slump, brothers. So if you look at his performances, he had his highest performance against Complexity back at, I think it was Lisbon, But since then, he has been, on obviously the spiked performances make performances that are, an 80 to 100 ADR performance or a, 85 or a 75 performance looks slightly underwhelming, but he had a consistent but low ADR slash output over the most recent period. And if we break it down by CT and T side, he is more than competing or more than outperforming his own T side performances on CT side, which from your, star, your young fragger, your guy that you're looking for, that's really not what you want to be seeing, I would think. You would want him to be that cracked entry fragger that you're setting up on the T side to get all the numbers that you can. And the fact that most of his ADR is coming from the CT side instead of the T side, in especially a, swing heavy meta like CS2 has been pushing for the most recent periods of time, that I think is a perfect encapsulation of their current bottleneck. People are calling Senzu the Asian Stound, which I think is a bit cruel to Senzu because who wants to be compared to Stound? But it's starting to bear some merit, and hopefully he can start picking up more on the T side, or hopefully they can rejig things to get him a better T side performance, because otherwise that's really going to be their limiting factor. On the other hand, Techno has been picking it the hell up on T side. More consistently, he does outperform his ratings just slightly on CT side. But as of late, he's been doing more and more work on T side, ending obviously with his very strong showing against MIBR. But opposition changes, and really he falls off hard against the top opposition. If you look at his T side version of the chart, a lot of his really low ratings are against Liquid, Vitality, Spirit. He has a lot of, the top opposition that they would have to break through in order to be that trophy winning roster. He really starts to fall off in performance against. But beyond that, looking at our narratives that we can think of, obviously I already talked about the editing me really quick. I forgot to talk about 910. So over the course of the season, 910 has been fairly high variance, but at the beginning of the season had fairly standout CT performances, which helped propel Mongols into their early success. But if you look at his charts, you can see that variance take its toll as they start to struggle as it goes on. But with recent form, he is starting to find that again, and actually has had 2 T-side performances in the past 2 months over 100 ADR, which, that's one more than Senzu. So I would say, obviously 910 isn't a flawless player, but they are showing high variance, but high impact, and I can't really call for any issues with them right now. So back to the main pathing of the video. The Stound situation, jokingly for Senzu, and Techno, showing a greater performance after a bit of a slump. But beyond that, I think that they're fine the way they are. They need to develop tactically, which, they have Mira to help them with them, or Mira. I apologize if I mispronounced that. I'm flowing right now. And he also very likely could, pull another player from a Mongolian LAN cafe that's 16, 17 right now, bring them into the team in a year or two and cycle out one of the older players to raise that overall floor. And that may be the thing that pushes Mongols to actually winning a trophy of the highest caliber, because, right now their current age is 20.7, 20.8, something like that. They're an extremely young team that can all develop. And, if Blitz is the fragging IGL that we're going with, he is keeping up and he is absolutely one for the future. But Senzu needs to absolutely step up more on the CT side, or not the CT side, on the T side, because he's their star. And hopefully Techno can maintain some of this form going into the majors. So that way they can be scrappy with this new top 4 that we're seeing solidify themselves. So moving on to the guys over at Eternal Fire / Aurora, Aurora Borealis. And they've had, looking at their performances, I would say the real standout this year, at least in the latter half of this year to me, has been Wakadia and Yota. Because Yoda has just been a very consistent and safe pair of hands for them in his first season within the team, which, he's overall raised their floor in place of, the person he replaced, who I mentioned earlier, who, because for some reason I can't remember his name, Calyx, But beyond that, Zontaris has seen a bit of a fall off on his T-side ratings, but we'll get to that when we get to that. But I will also preface all of that with the reminder that Zontaris is an elite class of rifler. We hold him to the same type of standards that we hold a Nico, a Zaiwu, a Donk in terms of, okay, Zontaris is, guys, he's in a bit of a slump. He's only putting up a 1.2 for the past 3 months. That's a bit of a slump, which for him, with the things he's capable of doing, and we know he can show us, it kind of is. And so when the team lives and dies by having such a true star player such as him, even though we're having increased performances from Yoda and from Wakadia, it's still not enough to get them back into that stratosphere of almost being trophy winning again. But starting off with Yoda, if we look at his overall performances, he's actually been in a bit of a, how shall we say, I wouldn't say slump, he's just been inconsistent, but he has been showing good peaks again and having performances when he is needed, as he is not the star of this team. If we break it down by CT and T side, he's been just a pretty safe pair of hands, with most of his dots coming in close together, meaning an equal performance across CT and T side, but he does stand out on both when needed, but having more standout performances on T side, which makes sense. Moving on to Major, Major is the not so fragging IGL. He has a Kerrigan-esque old school rating with multiple bottoming out performances, but he is attempting to bring tactics to this team, and most of his performances, he outperforms his T-side rating on the CT side, but he does have his occasional random carry performances. You cannot deny, that liquid 140 T-side rating. Because of course it's against liquid. But Major, he's the heart and soul of the team to a degree, being the old man. I don't see, unless someone else wants to IGL and they can really make it work without him, as a way to bring in more firepower, which makes sense in this modern day. Firepower has been king. Apex up there with the 1.05 IGL rating against top 5 this year. That was a couple months ago. It's probably even higher now, if not stable. But moving on to Wakadia. Wakadia has actually been phenomenal to me this year. He has been a standout player that I would love to see. I know it will never happen. Never going to get him out of the Eternal Fire / Aurora system, maybe. But I think Wakadia, if he speaks English, could go to an international team and do very well. He has consistently high CT and T side performances. I mean, just looking at his ADR over time chart just here, they're all so close together. He's got great spikes. He only has a few dips. He only has 1 or 2 performances even touching 40 ADR or below. And he's just been a phenomenal improvement over his last year. And since his addition to this Eternal Fire roster has really elevated them. So it's fantastic to see him keeping that up even now. Woxic is a bit of a weird one because he was starting to find himself again, how shall we say, as they brought back the left-hand view model. And he was always a flashy, streaky opper, but he is starting to find those peaks again for them, which is nice. But he also is still giving us those valleys. But if we break it down again by sides, you want your opper to be really strong on CT side, and he is showing up on CT side. He is defending. He's doing everything he can. It just might be that they need a bit more out of him aggressive-wise. I know, out of Woxic aggression. On the T side, but also, like I said, Zontaris has his stuff will cover, which finally here we are. Oh my God, look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 performances of above a 100 ADR and multiple just on the cusp. He's in a slump. What are we going to do? But it is worth noting, if you look as it goes on, we do have more consistently bottoming out performances. Bottoming out, he's still putting above 80 ADR because it's Zontaris and he's a phenomenal rifler, but it is still more consistently lower performances across the board. Break it out by CT and T side, and you'll see that he is having some truly abysmal CT or some truly abysmal T side performances. Most specifically, looking in this region right here, he has 4 sub 60 T side ratings, which for a rifler of his caliber, where he's the sort of talisman of the team, that is really going to hold them back in competing at the highest levels. And, if you look even towards the beginning of the season when they were, competing for more trophies, his CT rating was far and away better. So it's very interesting to see him start to fall off even harder, even though it's still Zantares. He's still a phenomenal rifler doing incredible things that blow your mind. Is that little less extra X factor out of him is what is making or contributing to the difference for Eternal Fire no longer being that sort of, at least to me, number 4, number 5. They are probably number 5 now, but number 4 team. They were that just on the cusp of winning 2 trophies team, even if they were PGL and Blast events. But either way, all of these players are still phenomenal and all of them still have potential. The thing with Eternal Fire, I think, is that, last year, like I said, they had a strong start to their season and then tapered off towards the end with them missing the second major of the year, despite having decent placings at the beginning of the second season of the year. They had something similar happen now, but it's a bit more of an extreme case. Instead of having a couple of decent placings, they have a couple of almost wins. They make every single playoff they attend for like 8 events straight. They are hitting that next level that they were hoping to hit by adding Jota. And so I think that they have I'm just going to refer to competition as a muscle. They're competitive muscles, their ability to be on the road, grind, and do things. People, frame things differently within their head. One way of thinking about it is, a semester. You may have 2 weeks off, a month off in the middle of the semester. You're still in the middle of a semester. You're still carrying all of that with you because in your brain, it's one continuous piece. Now, hopefully the Aurora sports psychologists, if they have one, are helping them to compartmentalize, break that down, and break it out so that way they can truly relax. But it seems that Eternal Fire / Aurora has a consistent problem of making it through the end of a season full energy the entire time. And that's not a critique of them, and that's not saying that they are lesser than for doing that. It's just an observation based on at least, the past year of their performance. They start to putter out towards the end. And I am hopeful that, as mentioned previously, by Dust Morant, that they just came off a month of resting, and to see them still sort of struggle like this is concerning. So I don't know, man. Are the Mongols and Aurora cooked already at this point in the season? Are they done? Maybe. Shit. I definitely think Aurora's fried. I definitely think Aurora is fried. Them losing to Big is a pretty damning result. I think the Mongols will still manage to be scrappy, but I think they've been pushed out. We have our competitive top 4 solidified going into the major. It'll be a Vitality, Mouse, Falcons, and Spirit competition. So, fucking A. But that's been my ramble. That's been my way too many charts. I promise I'll make better ones, and we'll be making new stuff. Follow me on Twitter if you want to see me tweet about stats and tweet about, charts as I make them and develop them. If you guys are heading to I Am Dallas, I'll be seeing you there. I'm very excited to see you. And beyond that, I'll also be probably starting an Instagram pretty soon. I might link it in the description here just to get it started. I will be, in Dallas, and then afterwards I will actually be in Japan for 2 weeks, and then I will be in Austin shortly after that, so I'll have a ton of photos and crap going on. But beyond that, thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been a bit of a higher quality video than what I've put out recently, the just sort of 5-minute or like 15-minute rambles that have no real substance to them beyond, just personal observations of someone who watches the games. But yeah, I've been CJ. Have a great one.